We're back on the War Room powered by Draft HQ and Prep Baseball. I am your host, Shooter Hunt, here with DJ Svihlik. We're back at it. We talked a lot about some prep right-handers last time. We had some big things to say. You're throwing out charts. So are we going to draft only righties this year? What are we going to do?
I don't think so. I think especially as you get into some of the things we're going into next week, I think there's going to be some really good hitters on the board and whatnot. But to your point, I think further down the board into the second round, there's some great opportunities for some teams to get into that stuff. So,
and in talking that, we're going to have mock draft coming out. We got a new draft board coming out this week. In going through the mock draft, which can be a process in itself, the one thing that I did notice, I kept pushing back because of the conversation we had. Those prep right-handers, there's going to be so much value in rounds 2 to 3, even more so that 31, the supplemental picks, just because some guys may come off the board. But chopping up those signing bonuses, a lot of these teams have huge pools, but there's tons of value.
And yeah, I think you've been seeing a lot of it on the East Coast. You've been on a trip now for what, 7, 8, 9 days, working on your mock draft and seeing a lot of the arms that are out there. It's pretty exciting. I know we touched upon it last time, but some really good opportunities.
It's really fascinating to find these right-handers, especially the guys I've been seeing. New Jersey's had a huge pop-up group of big-time guys who I think can slide in that supplemental through 3. But the fascinating area by area, each have those guys that are kind of in that cycle, and then you go into the weather cycles. But anyway, we will dive into lots more of that stuff. With the Draft HQ draft board, mock draft coming, we'll dive even deeper into some teams and their signing pools and what they'll be working with. But we got a lot more stuff on this show that's more pertinent to what we're doing today.
Yeah, I think so. I want to, before we jump into that, I want to circle back on a couple things specifically because we got some great feedback and really good comments from a lot of different people in the baseball community, from families with kids that are 13, 14, 15 years old, provided some great feedback. I got feedback from the scouting community about some of the things we discussed. So I want to circle back before we move into today's topic, which is going to be offense. It's going to be pretty exciting stuff. And our guest is fantastic today. I want to talk about a couple things that we touched on last time. Number one, I got a comment about the Pirates and cherry picking players. Our job, I'm not here to put people on a pedestal. And we certainly weren't here just to push high school pitching. We were here to discuss high school pitching and some of the opportunities that existed. And as we were going through that stuff, you look at teams like the Pirates. We're not cherry-picking organizations. The Pittsburgh Pirates, and they're not the only one. I can use examples like the Toronto Blue Jays, who, what was that, 2010 through 2011, they loaded up on guys like Noah Syndergaard, and Aaron Sanchez was in that area. I believe Joe Musgrove was in that area. They took Daniel Norris. So it's not just the Pirates, but when you look at the Pirates going back all the way to 2011, and they take guys like Clay Holmes, and then they go into 14 and they take Keller, and then they don't sign him, but they take Nick Lodolo. Then they take Shane Baz. Then they take Quinn Priester in 19 and Jared Jones and Bubba Chandler. The point here is you've got an organization making a concerted effort. And what should be pointed out is that they have been successful, and they've been successful because they've been willing to take that leap. That was the point we were trying to illustrate, was they've been willing to take the leap. They recognize that you can't pick a needle out of a haystack. You've got to commit. And I'd say the same thing if you were going to get into the catching market, or you were going to get into the shortstop market or the athlete market. Here, as we talk about pitching, it's pretty clear. It's not a surprise that Anthony Salamito, who they just selected as a top 100 prospect, or that Bubba Chandler, a two-way guy, is a top 100 prospect. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that Alex Anthopoulos, who's been with the Blue Jays for his career, moves to the Braves. Shooter, do you remember who they took in 2022? Should we remind everybody?
No, remind them right now.
Owen Murphy, J.R. Ritchie, Cole Phillips.
High school right-hander.
Alex Anthopoulos coming from the Blue Jays, where they've done those things in the past. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that teams are willing, and the teams out there that are asking and questioning, why aren't we drafting, or why aren't we developing high school pitching? The first question you need to ask yourself is, are you selecting enough of it? So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, which I thought was really important. And the other thing is, and I think this is critical for the prospect. You talked about this. We talked about this. What can happen for the prospect? Our message, who we're speaking to right now, isn't just the scouting community. We exist at Prep Baseball to elevate the prospect. We have showcases. We provide great opportunities for players to elevate their career. And this is part of it. So when a young player goes to the combine, they need to understand they need to take ownership in their career. This was a question that came in from a parent. What questions should the players ask when they're at the combine? These high school pitchers. It's not enough if I'm sitting there as a scouting director and I hear a young prospect ask me, DJ, tell me about your pitching philosophies. He just let me off the hook. That's a layup for me. I could tell him anything I want to tell him. But if that prospect says to me, DJ, tell me about the high school pitchers that you've developed and where have you had success? Now I have to ask, now I'm in a tough spot. Now I have to tell the truth. I can't avoid that question. So I would encourage young prospects when they go to the combine, ask those questions of the scouting directors. You owe it to yourself. It's your career. You take ownership in your career. And then a final question that I got was the fastball movement. You talked about this. I had a long conversation with a really, really reputable good scout recently about this. And I want to be clear. One of the things that I said was, as a scouting director, I don't take bets on fastball movement improvements. And the reason for that is because a lot of the players now, their agents, the places that they've been, whether it's Cressy or it's Tread or it's Driveline and all these different ranches and stuff around the country, they're exposed and they know what they need to do to get better. So I'm making the assumption that a lot of players, but it's up to the team to understand what the development curve is for that player. So can fastball movement improve? Yes, it can improve. But as a director, I'm making some assumptions that the players have already been around it. So I wanted to clarify some of those things before we move on to the.
Hey, DJ, let me ask you about the clarification on that fastball. How important is it to know what the background, where this kid has been? So, like, yes, all those facilities, a lot of kids have that, and they have the throwing program, the workout, they've done all this stuff. Some are kind of from the woods, they have not done that. Would you know that immediately? Like, that's something you want your area guy diving into,
absolutely,
and you might have a chance. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we touched on this last time. The area scout is critical in this.
Mm-hmm.
When we selected Carson Milbrandt in the 3rd round, that selection was made. That was 2022 that we took Carson Milbrandt. And he's been really good for the Marlins.
Okay.
That selection was made specifically because of the work of a first-year area scout whose care level was extremely high. He understood the background of the player. He made me comfortable reaching into the high school bucket because of the work that he did. So to your point, yes, the area scout is absolutely critical, knowing the relationships that the player has and what that development curve looks like for the player. So absolutely critical. Great point, Shooter.
Awesome. The market inefficiency, I think some teams are trying to find in these right-handers has a chance to be very valuable, although I still see it when everybody likes this arm until one team selects it, then they hate him. That seems to be the going rate on prep pitchers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's, moving forward today, I'm pretty excited to talk about the position player. We've talked a lot about hitting, but we're turning a little bit, and we're going to start talking about some position player stuff today. From an evaluation standpoint, Shooter, I don't think people realize how difficult the hitting side is. We've just talked about, and we didn't get into the weeds about the actual evaluations or the boxes that are being checked. But rest assured, when you sit in a draft room, decision-making room, meeting room, and you're talking about the boxes for the pitchers, number one, are very, very defined and refined, I might add. Refined, so you have a lot of confidence in it. So you've got a refined checklist of things to look at with pitching, college and high school. But number two, and almost more importantly, you have more outcomes. When you look at a young pitcher, high school or college, left-hander, it doesn't matter. The outcomes can be a number of different things. You can be a setup guy, you can be a closer, be a starter, 5, you can be number 3, you can be a middle reliever. There's just all these different outcomes. There aren't any outcomes with hitters. The outcome is usually it is or it isn't. It's success. And I'm being a little bit extreme here, but I think we get the point. It becomes extremely difficult with hitters. So teams are constantly looking for ways to make better, more refined decisions with hitters. And it's really, they're trying to formulate that checklist. And there's teams, the Baltimore Orioles, I think that's the That's the obvious choice here, who've done an extremely and make no mistake, that's a derivative of who? The Astros. And who are the Astros a derivative of? The Cardinals. So that pipeline has been developed over a number of years that have allowed an organization, but they're one of the few organizations that have done it. So they might look at our pitching stuff that we just discussed and say, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to just stay with the hitting route. Most teams can't say that. Why?
The pitching aspect, and to me, like you were just saying, the defined routes of what you can evaluate now with TrackMan, radar, everything funnels in. It doesn't matter if you're pitching in the woods in Montana, Idaho, down in Southern California, Florida, Texas. Hey, we have the spin rate, we have the axis, we have the vertical approach, we have plate height. Everything's kind of there to help, especially a person who's not in person or at the game. Look at video, add the data, be outside of the fact of whoever the hitter is, right? The kid who's throwing 95 against a 1A team, whatever high school he's at, should just be dominating. And it may not have great characteristics outside the fact that he's facing 14 and 15-year-olds. Hitting is different, right? We don't know what you're going to be able to do. That it's not quite as on top of things. We've had blast motion. We have those exit velocities and whatnot from that. But who is your competition going? Oh, this guy hit 600. Yeah, but where did he hit 600? So some of those evaluation tools, I think back to even Jackson Merrill, who the Padres did a great job identifying, probably ahead of everybody on that curve. He's getting off to a great start so far, but he's playing in that Maryland, Northern Virginia area. What arms is he seeing? Yes, he's having some success, but who is it against? And that's something you don't have quite the long track record for him. I don't even know if he was at East Coast Pro, Jackson Merrill, but
he was not. Sure, let me jump in here for a second. I think you brought up a good point. You know, these measurables that we have for hitters, I've gone way down the road of performance with high school hitters, and you can't find anything. Jackson Merrill didn't do anything that summer. I can't recall if he was sick or he was hurt or what happened, but he just didn't do much. How about James Wood? James Wood, who's an uber prospect right now. Kudos to the Padres for pulling that off the board in the second round. They took a player that struck out more his senior year. He had more strikeouts than base hits. Try to swallow that one as a scouting director.
Ooh,
so there's obviously more. Right? Excuse me. There's obviously more than just performance. But teams have gone down this road of exit velocities, performance, specifically with these high school players, because we don't have the track record. You made some good points a second ago about who they're facing, but teams have investigated a lot of different avenues, and they continue to investigate these avenues, which leads us to what we're doing here today.
And I got to stop you if you heard this before. What's the hardest thing to do in sports? Hit a baseball. So
I was going to say evaluate hitting a baseball.
Even harder.
Exactly. But yes, point taken. Yeah. Hitting a baseball and trying to evaluate who can hit a baseball is extremely difficult. Every time you think you have an answer, you just fall in a hole. So it's difficult. I'm excited to have Paul Phillips on here today. We're going to talk about some really interesting stuff for people that don't know what Paul does. Paul's been with them. For people that don't know Paul, he's an extremely well-respected baseball guy. You know, Paul played at the university, baseball bloodlines. His cousin also played in the major leagues, both from the University of Alabama. Paul was drafted in 1998, I believe. The Royals took him, and he played for a long time in the major leagues before he got onto the field. Went onto the field, and he became a hitting coach at the highest level, AAA, and then he became a catching coordinator. So some fascinating, some exciting information today for our listeners. I think it's going to be a lot of fun hearing Paul's take on this whole offensive thing. So I'm going to welcome in Paul Phillips.
Thanks, guys. It's good to be here with you.
Paul, I'm super excited because I love the hitting aspect. I was a pitcher, so it's always like, who would I not want to face? Why would I not want to face him? What was the most important thing? And DJ's going to get into his section, but I'm going to say it multiple times. Decision making, because the biggest thing for me is, how is this guy getting takes on what I'm throwing?
Right.
So I'm very grateful for you to come on the show, because I think what you guys are doing is kind of the next wave of, hey, we got all the physical analytics. What's next? How do we get better?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and just the phrase decision making, I think a lot of people can interpret it in plenty of ways, right? I mean, we're measuring these brain systems that are responsible for decision-making tasks. And when I say that, I mean like when to swing, where to swing, should I swing? Am I on time to swing? Like all of those things are governed by the brain, right? And so when you're talking about, how did he take that? There are some pitch I can remember catching, right? And having a guy, and she's like, I looked at him after the pitch was thrown. How did you take that? How did you literally not swing it? We set you up perfectly. How did you not swing at that pitch? And he looked at me and he's just like, I'm not real sure. I don't know how. I don't know how that
quantify
happened,
it.
right? But it's just some people have these skills to be able to do that, and that's kind of where we come into play.
Paul, you said something right there that's interesting because you were a hitting coach. Well, you were a hitter, so
Right.
you understood all of the physical drills and progressions that you did over time to get to where that got you where you got. And as a coach, as a professional coach, you then executed some of those drills. But it sounds to me like it goes beyond traditional drills. You just mentioned, how did you lay off that pitch? Well, as a hitting coach, maybe is his load right? Has he slowed down his load? Yeah, there's a physical element there, but there's guys we see that do all the right things.
Yeah.
They always seem like generally they seem like they're on time, and they still can't either pull the trigger or they can't lay off. And it's reflected in these metrics that we have, whether it's a chase rate or fastball miss rates, whatever. How do you see the physical things that are necessary to be a good hitter blending with some of this cognitive stuff?
It's extremely important to have all of it, and I'll be honest with you, like we talk about 5 buckets. We believe that it's very necessary to have 5 buckets, right? One, you have to have tools, right? You have to have tools or it's going to be tough for you. It's hard for you to swing the bat at 30 miles an hour and then you make it to the big leagues, right? Probably not going to work for you, right? You also have to have good mechanics. So it's very important to have a good quality swing. That's very important. Your kinetic chain's got to flow correctly to make everything, get to the point where it needs to be. Then the third bucket we talk about, you got to have game knowledge and experience. You got to understand how to play the game. How are they approaching you? You've got to understand just the ins and outs of the game and have experience doing that. The fourth bucket we would tell you would be like the mental side of the game, your physical, like your psychological makeup. How well do you handle failure? Right? Things like that. Like, can you move on from your past error that you made it short the half inning before you're at bat? All those types of things, your grit, your work ethic, right? And then what we would say your fifth bucket is the cognitive bucket. That's what we bring to the table. That's what we're measuring. And that's like your brain's hardware. What do you actually have and possess to be able to process this information at a high and accurate level? It's like, what engine do you have in your vehicle? Can your car go 180 miles an hour, or are you tapped out at 90, right? And so we're just trying to figure out through our assessment, what do you actually possess to work with? We're just trying to help understand who this player is better when it comes to a cognitive standpoint. But every one of those buckets we feel are very, very, very important to have. And if you have, you may see a player that has extremely high tools but low cognition, and you may see them get to a certain level in the game, but they may not be this dominating player like we thought he would just because of all his tools being so elite, right? And so, we see AA players and AAA players all the time. They just don't make it to that next step. And there's a reason for it. We're just trying to help people understand a more bigger picture of like, hey, you can see all the things that you see with your eyes. Here's something that you can't see with your eye. We want to just try to help quantify how their brain's processing this information and making these decisions.
Oh man, and you don't need anybody to sit on a couch and tell you anything. This is straight up in a room with the computers. I know I've seen it. I love the fact because I'm always talking about the bell curve. Not all the way to one side. We're not all analytics. We're not all old school. Let's utilize all the information we can in person. And DJ, stop me if I'm going off too far here, but the player development aspect of this, because I know I went through the draft process. You guys have been through it. I know recently all the analytics, there can be times where it's like, do I want to take this from the draft side? But what I'm hearing from you is that the player development aspect of it might be even more important. Hey, we know how to work with you. Is that something you're providing to teams, and how does that work?
Oh, absolutely. So the first part, there's 3 pieces that we do. One is we work with the analytic department to help them find regressions and things. And then secondly, we do with player development. And then third, we work with scouting departments. Okay. And so with that being said, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're helping is each department understand what they need from us. And so, when we go out and we test the prospects, we have that set up for all of our teams to use for the draft, for use for player selection, help all the scouting departments understand, what do these systems mean? Because we're measuring 8 different brain systems and how this translates into, do I pick this player? Do I not pick this player? Well, we're not the end all be all. We're just another piece of the puzzle, right? And so, like I said, all these buckets play a big, big part. But when it's all said and done, if a player chases more and we can identify that, you may tolerate that from a guy who hits a lot of home runs, right? But you may not tolerate that from a guy who is a leadoff type player that needs to be on base, right? And so we're just trying to help understand who the player is and why the player does what they do on the field. And we're just trying to help create this total picture, and so for player development, it's okay, we can tolerate picking him as a player, knowing he has higher chase rates because he's a power hitter, because he still hits the ball out of the ballpark. Let's just try to take his chase rates from, a 30 and improve them to a 20. Let's try to improve some of these things and target these brain systems that we know are responsible through our analytics for these types of chase rates, for these types of whiff rates, for these types of walk rates. All of these things are driven from the brain. And so clearly, you can look at the swing and be like, that's not going to play because he's got too much elevation in this or that, or he's too steep to the ball, or we can see that. But what's the cause of these things, right? And so we're just trying to get to the root of the problem by looking at the brain systems that are responsible for the way that you hit.
I'm listening to Paul talk, and I'm thinking about all the experiences I've had in ballparks. And when I hear you say what you just said, one of the things that people don't realize is that when you walk into a double A, I'm going to start with the double A level, because once you get to the double A level, these are some of these guys aren't going to play in the major leagues. Let me be very clear. But they are still in the world of athletics. You make it to the double A level, you're an elite baseball player. Mm-hmm. You are an elite. And from that elite group, a lot of them won't play in the major leagues, but they're still really good. And very, very rarely as an evaluator do you stand in a ballpark, to your point, Paul, and say, man, that swing's not good. By the time you get up there, so what else is there that's happening that's going to prevent that player from achieving what organizations think? It's usually at that point not a swing problem. There's this other stuff that's happening under the hood that is holding the player back or propelling them forward. So I wanted to share that. In number 2, Paul, you mentioned helping things that players aren't as good at. You and I have talked. I've known you for a long time. Back when I was at Vanderbilt was when we first met, and we've seen S2 evolve over time. Helping players understand, hey, you're really, really good at this. Let's be awesome. This is Shooter's thing, good to great. The other thing we can do from this, from S2, it sounds like, is we can help understand what a player is really good at and then maximize that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, everybody, when they're assessed on the system, you're getting 9 different scores, right? And so it's 8 different brain systems and then an overall score. And so we take these Z-scores and convert them into percentiles and then reference them against our professional database, which we have over 2,000 players tested. And so whenever we're looking at this, it's, their overall score is kind of like a decathlon, right? You may finish second in every event, but win the whole decathlon because you've scored so high in every category. Well, and that's the same way it is with our stuff, right? And so if you score really high in every category, you bring a lot of high cognitive processing to the table, right? But you can have a low system and a high system and a low system and a high system. And some of these may not affect you in maybe, let's say, catching, but it will in hitting, right? Because catchers know what pitches are coming while they're catching, but they don't know what's coming when they're hitting, right? So having a system that's responsible for pitch recognition and pitch identification, if you don't have that as a catcher, it's not going to affect you catching, but it will affect you hitting, right? And so identifying what each one of these brain systems are responsible for helps you identify, okay, I can tolerate that with this player because he has this. If I have and perception speed. It's how fast the brain processes what the eyes give it, right? And so if I swing the bat slowly and process visual information slowly, not a good combination, right? And so on the physical side, I need to get my bat speed up. On the cognitive side, I need to create a little bit more time by backing up in the box, maybe develop a backside approach to allow my contact point to be later to allow me to process this pitch better, right? And so we're just trying to figure out how do we get around some of these low systems and some of these low underdeveloped systems, because it's not the player's fault. It's just kind of what mom, dad, and God gave them. We just got to identify it and figure out a way to help them perform with what they bring to the table.
Have you seen guys develop like that where you have the data sets where this does not work and they've been able to increase it and get better? Has that happened a lot?
Oh man, I tell you, it's so fun to hear the stories, to where I'll tell you, we did a study. We were interested to see, can we lower kids' chase rates? And we're like, let's just pick the pitch, the high fastball, and see if we can lower their chase rates. So we put them through a study as close to a double-blind placebo effect study we could in the cage. We measured them. We said, hey, swing at the strikes and take the balls. We threw high fastballs for strikes and high fastballs for balls and calculated their data, how much they swung at what they should and how much they swung at what they shouldn't. 4 weeks of training, 2 days a week, 30 minutes a day. We put them through what we would call a chase rate program, teaching them how not to chase that pitch. We lowered their chase rates over 70% in 4 weeks.
Oh,
okay. So Shooter, the way you just reacted is the same way I did. I thought we did something wrong. I'm like, I've never seen anything so impactful in player development. So let's do it again. We did something wrong. Let's do it again. We did it with a different group of kids and changed the pitch to a slider down in a way, and we got similar results. And so it's clearly our scientists understand, listen, this is how you move and train and manipulate this brain system. We're just applying it to the game of baseball. Our co-founders are cognitive neuroscientists, and one specializes in Parkinson's and one specializes in Alzheimer's. And so they're not just making things up, right? They've been in this medical world for a long time, and now they're just applying these principles to the game of baseball. And we do 10 sports and military and all kinds of any type of personnel that needs to make split-second decisions. That's what we're interested in.
Paul, why I'm listening to you talk here, and I don't want to make this a player development versus scouting thing, but I could see where the analysts love this. They want to just consume this stuff and put it in their models. And having been in scouting for 20 years, if nothing else, a scout is an information gatherer and a problem solver. So he's going to look at this information and say, give it to me. I want to think about this. You don't have relationships with 30 major league teams. I could be wrong here. What's the hurdle with player development? What a hurdle are you trying to clear? You were a coach, so you can see it through both lenses here. Where's the obstacle here? Where's the confusion? Sounds to me like player development needs to utilize this information.
Yeah. So one of the biggest hurdles is just the understanding of it, right? Is just understanding. Sometimes I feel like people may get a little overwhelmed with the information. You're training the brain. So you're not going to just be able to do it overnight, right? You're not going to be able to play an iPad and hope that I become a better hitter. That's just not the way the brain works, right? And so a lot of the times we want to do that, and we want to just put it on the player. Hey, go do this at home. Do this in your spare time. Come early. We'll work for 10 minutes or whatever. But it's just, it's not easy. DJ, and part of player development is getting in the trenches and putting in the work, right? And so a lot of that is tough. And so it's also tough when you have had coaches who have had a lot of success doing it their way, right? And so, but to that extent, some of these players are going to make it no matter who's their coach, right? And some of these players, it's just you pick the right guy, and so all I got to do as a coach is stay out of his way and make sure you don't fall in the gutter, right? He's going to make it. You know what I'm saying? So
go ahead.
But the hardest part is this is new information for a lot of the guys, and it's not just, hey, let's get in there and do some flips. It's let's target and let's look at some of these brain systems and really dive into understanding. I can tell you, some of the organizations we work with, some of their player development, they are all in, and you can tell through their system. And so it's just, we know it works, but it's just a matter of, some people, in my opinion, I feel like baseball is behind in technology. I mean, golf's way ahead of us, right? Especially in player development analytics, and so it's like when it comes to that stuff, it's hard to change some of the things and some of the people in the game, especially in player development, because a lot of us are just kind of, we've had success doing it this way. Yeah. And now why should I change when I've had success doing it my way? That's hurdles.
Here's a follow-up question, Paul, and this is a tougher question, and let me frame it this way for you. I'm a decision maker. It's essentially what I've done for my whole career. I was never in player development outside of being a player. I didn't spend a lot of time on the field as a coach, and I can identify with some of the things that players and coaches have to go through. My whole career was make good decisions.
Yep.
Hitters make good swing decisions. Scouts make good picking decisions, I guess you'd say. So when I hear you talk about player development, and I think about some of the decisions that we've had to make over the years, let me frame it this way. If you were picking, because different types of hitters exist throughout the draft, and we all know that the further the draft goes on, the hitters just fall off the board. Guys, they're going to have successful big. Very, very rarely are you going to pick Paul DeYoung or Goldschmidt. It just doesn't happen. That's very, very hard to pick those players down the board. So let's stay very specific at the top of the draft, where you're going to invest a lot of money and your job's on the line a lot of times as a decision maker. If you are in that position, are there certain thresholds, or are there certain combinations of things between what your tests reveal and some of the other analytics that we're utilizing, swing and miss rates? Would you be so inclined to say there's a hard yes and a hard no sometimes when you're selecting when you're making a high dollar selection?
So the way I would kind of approach that is, I know that there are some systems that are harder to train than others. And so if the systems that we know are responsible for chase rates and whiff rates and swing and miss and all of that, if I see that they have high swing and miss, and I look at their S2 and I see that they have low brain system development in these areas that we know cause that, I would have to really dive into how much can I tolerate, right? And so as an organization, everybody has their own model, everybody has their own formula, and we're in those formulas, right? And so it's just, who is this player? I wouldn't say yes or no 100% solely on my test. I don't believe that. I don't believe that's fair to do solely on one thing. What you guys do as a scout is, like you said, hitting the baseball is probably the hardest thing, but evaluating that hitter is probably the hardest thing, right? Because it's hard to tell, right? That's why I like the whole, when you go from high school to college, it's another filter to see if you're going to be able to perform at that level, right? And so people who have high cognitive abilities have a greater chance because they have something to bring to the table to work with. So people who don't, that doesn't mean they can't play. It doesn't mean they won't make it. It just means you're going to have some roadblocks ahead of them. And so as an organization, you may like a player for 1.2, but not 2.1. You may like a player for 1.2 with what he brings to the table, but not for $2.1 million, right? And so it's a matter of what your tolerance is and understanding our data with what you already know in your formulas and analytics and your metrics. And it's just kind of trying to create this whole picture to make you more comfortable with that yes or no decision. And, it's like, so sometimes teams fly me all over the country and out of the country to test players because they need to know, are we willing to pay that 8-figure salary for this particular player? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. But, my job's to just let them know what the data says and help them understand what it means, and then give it back to you and let you make that tough decision on whether or not you pick them or not.
Do different teams value different aspects of the S2 differently?
Yes, as a matter of fact. So like, some organizations, they create their own formula, means like we weight everything equally. Some organizations are like, this guy's a power hitter, I want to weight his impulse control, which is chase rates less. I want to weight his timing control, which is contact rates twice or double. They weight it how they see fit for them in making their decision and making their formula better suited for them.
Are you following the draft and even the seasons, knowing like I've done this guy, this is where he's at, this is what this team values, and you're locked into it?
Yeah, so it's interesting because when I see, I tell you what's the fun part. The answer is yes, I follow the draft. And when I see our teams pick players, I go and look at their reports, right? And I'm like, makes sense, makes sense, makes sense, makes sense. All right. And so sometimes it doesn't, but that's okay because they see something else that can overcome or compensate what they may not bring to the table with us. Most fun that I have is when I watch trades. When I see an S2 team trade with a non-S2 team, and sometimes I'm like, well, they got them, or wow, what a trade, because in player development, our job is to raise value in the current player we have and let the front office decide how long they stay there. Our job is just to raise value in the player, whether that's to get them to our big league team or to move them for another big league player or another piece of the puzzle to help our big league team. Player development never quits, never stops, right? And so you always are having to develop these players to raise value for the betterment of your club, however the front office sees fit. And so that's where S2 can come into play is let's really target. He's got low timing. Like we believe in rhythm and timing. Rhythm is your ability to get to a good hitting position on time. Timing is when do I actually initiate the swing to intercept the ball with the barrel? When do I pull the trigger to actually make contact with the pitch, right? And so with that being said, timing controls the number one reason we have contact rates. And so when you look at high timing, you typically see high contact, right? And so it's like, this guy doesn't swing and miss very much. Well, his timing is off the chart. That's why. And so these brain systems are responsible for certain actions on the field, and it's no coincidence to us why they can do some of these things.
Have you had any hitters or any pitchers come in the room and try to break these computers and just stop you from identifying this?
So it is pretty comical because, listen, I mean, you're pushing the brain past what it's humanly capable of doing through our evaluation. It's kind of like getting a 1 rep max, right? Can I squat 400 pounds? Yes. Can I squat 415? Yes. Can I squat 425? No. Now I back it down. Can I do 420? Yes. But I can't do 425. Okay, now we found your sweet spot. Now we know what your max is, your capacity. That's what we're doing in S2 is measuring your brain capacity. So you may be able to have the capacity to drive 180 miles an hour, but that doesn't mean you always drive 180 miles an hour. I tell the analogy all the time, like Jeff Gordon's got a NASCAR that can win races. But if I get in that car, I'm not going to win a race with his car because I don't know how to drive it yet. Now, give me some time to learn how to sync up my ability with his car and teach me how to drive it. That's what we do in the cage, right? We see you have the ability. So let's link these systems up to hitting so that you can go and use them in the batter's box the way that you need to because you possess them. And if you don't, let's figure out the workaround and let's build them up as much as we can and capitalize on the things that you can do.
It seems like it's to the hitting side, this is gone over the top the way the Edgertronic helped pitching, where instead of spending the whole offseason throwing as many sliders as I can to find feel, slowing down the Edgertronic from behind and being able to tinker with my grip from pitch to pitch, sped up how quickly I could develop that. Now you're able to go in and be like, hey, I need my reaction time, or this pitch is off. It's just like the sliders you were talking about. This is off the plate. And DJ, sorry, I'm going long-winded with this. Different regions hitters. Would this be something that would be beneficial for that? Where, hey, we're all going to this national tournament, whereas our kid from Maine, he has not seen these pitches the same level the kid from Southern California or Florida has. But does he have that type of upside? Does this answer that immediately? And those teams you're working with are starting to circle names. They're sending out area scouts into the woods. They're going in with their parkas in the snow-filled gymnasium to see these guys.
Yeah. So think about if you possess the ability in your brain to process this information extremely quickly, yet you've never seen some of these pitches before, you're going to recognize them. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to hit them yet. Okay. There now you do have to start building this in, right? It's like I coach my 13-year-old kid and my 10-year-old kid and my 6-year-old kid. And so when my 13-year-old first saw a curveball, he was like buckled and flipping out. I'm like, what the, how's the ball supposed to do it? Right. So the more he sees that, so when I say link up these brain systems to the game of baseball, we now train and give, hey, here's a big slow curveball. Here's a tighter curveball. Here's what they look like. So you're building this visual database for them to extract that data from and use it. How fast they do it is up to their brain system and how well it's developed, right? And so, we're not interested in your visual acuity. Like the eyes give the brain some information. We pick up where the brain starts processing that information, and then it sends a signal to the body to execute. We're not interested in your body executing it, right? My brain may tell my body at this point in time, hey, do this. My body may, at my age, may look at it and be like, I can't do that no more. I might still be able to process that information, but I can't pull it off anymore, right? But at the end of the day, we're interested in how fast and accurately you can process these swing decisions. Like, what pitch is it? Where is it going? When do I swing? Where do I swing? Should I swing? And if I have decided to swing and it turns out to not be what I want, can I stop my swing? All of that is happening in less than like 230 milliseconds. That's what's so fascinating in seeing these major league hitters. I mean, you see some people, a pitch comes out of the hand and like, that's not a strike. And they just shut it down. You're like, he didn't even offer, and the ball looked like 10 feet out of the hand. He just shut it down. Some people, it's like, gosh, this guy's got an unbelievable eye. Well, that's a brain system that's responsible for processing that information.
So you mentioned your sons, and you were also a minor league hitting coach. How do you instruct your sons? What types of drills do you do with them that maybe 10 years ago, you're like, yeah, I wouldn't have done that. But now
notebook out.
You go, no, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And it's no different if the player was a 22-year-old in AA that's very talented. What types of drill work and how has that changed over time as you've been a coach?
When I took the test, it showed that I had low impulse control and low stopping control. I had really good other scores. Okay. Let me tell you how that implemented, how that changed and was actually, I guess, showed up in my game was impulse control is chase rates and stopping is check swings. So I would chase a pitch, but I had really good bat to ball. So I'm chasing that slider away, flipping it off the barrel to the second base, and pissed off the whole time. I got to run to first base now because I made contact with that pitch and had got out. Right? Guess what? I am my son's dad. So I guarantee you I am passing some of that on to them. So what do? They have no idea that the drills that we put our little teams through aren't normal. Like, we'll do a 4-plate drill. We'll put 4 plates in front of each one plate, and then another plate in front of that one, another plate in front of that one, and another plate in front of that one, all going towards the pitcher, 18 inches apart, because that's equivalent to about 2.5 miles an hour. And so I make them hit from the back plate, and then they scoot to the next plate, and then they scoot up to the next plate, and they scoot up to the next plate. All of that is teaching them how to time up when they should swing. Well, all that's predictable. They know if I step closer to the pitching machine, I've got to swing sooner. That doesn't mean that they're not getting a good workout, right? You think about in the mechanical work we do off the tee. Nobody ever hits off the tee in the game, not once you get past 6, right? And so at the end of the day, but a tee is a fundamental part in building mechanics. Very structured cognitive progressions are very important because you start very predictable and very structured, and then you move to be more dynamic to where by the end of the day, the pitcher is in one spot, the hitter's in one spot, and we're changing pitch speeds off that machine using like the E-hack attack when you can set a pitch sequence program. They're all in the same spot, but they're different speeds because I'm targeting one brain system by doing this. That's a timing control. That's contact rates, right? Watching our kids go from swinging and missing so much to raising their contact, it's been so much fun because these kids just think that they think that there's just coincidentally getting better at it. Right. But we're also teaching them how to make better contact. And then we do drills like, hey, look, if you're chasing a high fastball, I'm going to throw a bunch of them up there and I'm going to teach you how not to swing at it. So when you see it up there, you're not so strong to go after it every single time you see it. So we teach them how to take as well as how to swing. So all of these things are trainable. You just have to understand how the brain system works. And we all start with a very structured progression and move to be very dynamic with the end of it. So it is more game like. So you do get transfer effect onto the field. So it does show up in your performance. That's player development. That's how you move the needle in these kids and any of these players. Some are a little bit more rigid because they're a little older, right? But when you got a kid that's 12, 13, 14, you can move that kid's brain around like crazy in a positive way.
I mean, I love that you're guiding them towards discovery, giving them that ownership. Essentially, you're sneaking vegetables into their
yeah, right. That's so true. I mean, like all of the things that, and I'll be honest with you, like we test kids at 12 and 13 years old, and you expect their numbers to be low because some of these brain systems are just starting to come online and really start to take root and develop. And so, but some of these, in the frontal lobe, they don't come on to like 12 or 13. They don't fully mature to like some people mid-20s, 24, 25.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so you have the ability to manipulate and grow and develop these things. Now, the older you get, the less room you have for building these systems up. It's more about just using and adapting, right? And finding workarounds to allow them to be better. Because what we're targeting is specific usage of these brain systems, not globally. Like think about impulse control. It's responsible for chase rates, like chasing a high fastball or a pitch that you don't want to swing at. But it's also in football responsible for jumping off sides. It's also responsible for misdirection in soccer and jukes in basketball and taking your foot off the brake when you're at the red light and the green arrow flashes, but that's not your lane, and then having to put your foot back on the brake. All we're doing is like that brain system is responsible for all of those things. We're just targeting one, and that's how not to chase the high fastball or how not to chase whatever chase pitch you're more vulnerable to. And we're pushing that brain system to get better in that context only. And so you will see improvement in the contextual use that you're training it in performance. You may not see, I teach you how not to chase a high fastball, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to jump off sides in football. I didn't train you not to jump off sides in football, right? So they don't overlap. It's just a matter of pushing and using it in context so that we can build a better player.
Paul, you've evolved a lot, it sounds like, since I first met you at Vanderbilt in 2016, 2017, right in there. What's next for S2?
Well, what we want to do is really educate the youth. There hasn't been one team that when I sit down and say, hey, here's what we do, here's how we can help. Not one team has said, yeah, I don't need that. Not one. It's just a matter of helping the youth and helping the teams and helping the people, right? The population of baseball players and coaches, helping them understand what we can actually do, right? We give an assessment, it spits out some results, it tells the player based on your results, here's what we recommend. And then we've built this playbook to where it's like, hey, because you score here, you should dive off into this playbook. Our colleges that we work with are using this in camps. They use it for their own players. They use it in player development. They use it in recruiting, and so it's just, one of my favorite statements, DJ, is like the best college coach is the best recruiter because he picks the best players and then they go out and kick everybody's butts. Right. And so at the end of the day, it's like, I was always excited when I was the catching coordinator. It's like, who are they going to give me to work with? What dude are they going to give me to work with? And so it's like the better the player they give me, the easier my job is. Right. And so that puts it back on you as the hardest part is picking the best people. And so we're just trying to help one. It comes full circle with S2. You want to have these kids take the eval when they're 12 and 13 to understand who they are and how they need to start building their player development programs, because mom, dad, and God gave them this hardware to work with. We want to identify who they are and then start these player development programs so that they can better their player development so they get noticed by these college and professional scouts. And then they take the S2 for our college and professional scouts and recruiters, And then those guys understand we should take him because you can't guess your way to a good score. He has high cognitive processing. He also has all these other buckets that we're checking off. You can't guess your way to a good score. So these are predictors to help us understand who he truly is and what he's going to be capable of. Because when you really see these brain systems get exploited is when they're facing the best of the best. You might see a kid, because he's bigger and stronger, beat people up at that age. But once he gets to that certain talent, you start seeing guys, that's where we talk about double A. When you start seeing dudes, though, 95 plus, decision making comes into play exponentially. And so it's all of these things. When do I swing? Where do I swing? Should I swing? Is this a pitch that I'm even looking for? Am I going out of my plan? All of these things can be measured and quantified. And that's what we're helping our scouts and our professional teams and college recruiters understand. And then once you pick them, you give us a head start in player development saying, hey, look, we know he struggles with this. We know it stems from this. We also know that you can train that. Go get him. Build us a guy that we know, that we believe in, and help him speed up his player development programs faster.
Paul, this has been awesome. I just have a couple more selfish questions from my standpoint to finish from my end, DJ. One, as I turn into the crazy dad, how soon is too soon for my kids to get S2 cognition? They're now 5.
Well, so I've tested my kid when he was 8.
Okay.
Now, it was a terrible, terrible experience for him because it's going so fast. Some of these kids, the reaction times aren't even, you look at your kid, you're like, hey, go to your room and pick it up, right? And then they look at you for like 2 seconds, and before they even go anywhere, that's because their processing and reaction time hasn't fully developed yet either, right? And so it's not they're being defiant. It's just understanding how the brain works, right? And then they turn around and walk off and go and do their thing. But we've tested, we feel confident. And here's the thing, it's like just understanding how the brain works. If you want to test your kid at 10 because you want to give S2 some money and test your kid at 10, you just need to understand you shouldn't expect very good results because it's not fair. You wouldn't test your kid at 10 and measure him against a 14-year-old kid in his foot speed. That's not fair, right? Same thing in his education. Although nothing we do has anything to do with education, that's not a fair comparison. Just because of pure maturation, the brain's going to mature just like the body does. And so you don't want to measure a kid who hasn't hit puberty yet against kids who are 3 years in puberty, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. And then the last question I have is there any, so we talked about some of the on-field stuff for a youth player. You guys are doing a great job with the youth, which, sorry pitchers, you're just screwed in the long run. Any apps or is there off the field stuff kids can be doing? Like, is it beneficial to read? Is there an app on a device that, hey, this app actually correlates really well and helps a kid about to go on a 6-hour flight with 2 kids? Like, is there some way I can be getting them better while on the plane?
Well, man, I can tell you that we wish that it were that easy to manipulate and stimulate and move the brain when it comes to performance and transfer effect. That's the biggest thing. You can do some of those things for entertainment, but playing an iPad is not going to help you be a better hitter because you're taking the bat out of the hand. It's a perception action coupling. There's a phrase, right? You hear that a lot in baseball. It's, the perception is the visual side of it, but then there's an action that comes to it. If you're going to play an iPad, you're going to get better at that iPad because you are mapping out your action to the stimulus visually that you're getting. So you're going to get better at that game on the iPad. That doesn't mean it's going to transfer into you being a better hitter. And so that's the thing. Like, all of our drills are done on the field or in the cage with the bat in your hand, making decisions, whether it's visually understanding the strike zone, visually understanding what pitch that is, understanding when to get my foot down, where to swing the bat, when to swing the bat, and pushing those boundaries of, hey, if I'm struggling with contact, I need to get better at timing. We can even decipher who struggles catching up to a fastball after they saw an off-speed pitch versus who struggles waiting on an off-speed pitch after they saw a fastball, because their brains are built certain ways. Some people don't have that problem. Some people struggle going both ways. Some struggle one way versus the other. But when you identify that based on our evaluation, once you identify that, then you can actually train them in that progression to not have that vulnerability be as dominating as it is already.
Okay, so iPad will not help you. That's Ted Williams approved comment right there. I can already guarantee that.
Well, it's one of those things like, what can it do, right? If you're facing a guy, like, let's just be real, like rhythm control is your ability to get to a good hitting position. If I've got video of this guy and I throw him up on the TV in the locker room and I'm watching him pitch and I'm trying to get my load and get my foot down on time, probably going to help. Okay. But pitch recognition from an iPad, it's not the same size. It's not the same visual clarity. It's not the same quality. An iPad's not going to help you with pitch recognition. Now, if you're using it for pitch shape, helping you identify this pitcher's shape, his curveball has whatever horizontal break, you understand that might be 20 inches. That might be whatever it is. That can help you build a visual database, but you also want to make sure you're getting a visual representation from the hitter's eye, not from the center field camera, from the catcher's view, because that's the view the hitter is using, right? And so if you're not using the right visual, then it's kind of pointless. Like, we watch the game from center field camera, right? That helps me a little bit with pitch shape, but it doesn't help me build a visual database to use when it comes time for me to hit that pitch, because it's not coming from the same angle.
Spot on.
Mm-hmm. Did you, going back to your time at Meridian, did you know that you were going to be a neuroscientist?
Well, clearly I'm not a neuroscientist, but I can tell you one thing. I did not know this, but it was as soon as the guys, both of our co-founders, I met them when they worked at Vanderbilt. And so they had labs over at Vanderbilt. And when they came over and tested my team, I thought I was getting punked by one of my coaches because they introduced me to him. And I was like, "You're punking me." I'm like, "Where's the camera? This is not funny." Because they were telling me about my players and they didn't even know these kids' name except seeing it on a piece of paper. And they're telling me about my players and they're like, "This guy's going to be a stud." I'm just like, "I think he is, but why do you think he is?" "Oh, I bet he does this well. I bet he does this well. I bet he does this well." I'm like, "Yeah, he does." DJ, we had him slotted to bat ninth as a freshman because I didn't want to just throw him in leading off. Right. I wanted to get his feet wet, so I bet we were going to bat him ninth. And then after I saw his results and he scored in the 90s, I'm like, "You're batting first, bro. You can handle it." He went on to be a freshman All-American. Wow. I'm telling you, it blew my doors off the way that they were able to tell how these players should and have the capabilities of performing outside of the physical realm, right?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I absolutely love this. I liked it when you brought it to Vandy a few years ago when I met with you, and more teams should be – kudos to the teams that are investing this kind of stuff. Helps you answer some really, really difficult questions.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for coming on with us. S2 Cognition, I'm excited about the future. I know we had you guys at the Super 60, some exciting data there, what we can do in the youth aspect, and for nothing else, for expanding the game and making more people fall in love with it, especially the player development side. So, Paul Phillips, thank you so much.
Great catch up with you, Paul.
Thanks.
Woo! Take a deep breath, shooter.
DJ, I know we were going into the draft aspect of all of that, but all I can think of was getting my 5-year-olds out on the field right now, moving them up on the plate, getting things going, getting some pitch recognition, going full on hard-o dad.
Yeah, I think that's what the game's about. I mean, I watch my son play hockey. It's for all sports, whether it's soccer, lacrosse, hockey, but helping coaches grow and utilize different techniques and utilize different types of information to help the kids just be better. That's really all it is. I know we're speaking here at a really high level about major league stuff and Division I stuff and whatnot, but really you made a great point about this is about the younger kids and the next generation of baseball player, not allowing a kid to be left behind because we don't know something about him. Maybe taking a player that's really good at something and really magnifying that and letting them be great at it. And I think tools like this are there to help us.
The thing that I found super fascinating about it was their ability to get guys better, just in the cage. And I know from scouting, you've been to huge events, made monster decisions. When I go to evaluate kids from different areas of states, right? You're coming from the Northeast, Southwest, Southeast, all over. You're at a different place in your developmental factor. So a kid from New England who's been indoors, has not seen pitching, goes down to Lake Point at a time when the kid from Alabama and Florida, they are peaking. They are midseason form. They've been seeing they're at 250 at bats. How do you evaluate those guys? They're just in a different place. Hey, you go out to the West Coast, you're flying out there, you're seeing these guys who've been playing since January 10. You just had a condensed season that started April 10th in New Jersey. You were snowed out for a week. You couldn't get into a rhythm. Where are you on the evaluation scale, and how high can you get? Which is why, for me, it was not quantified. But when a Northeast kid or a Northwest kid, Midwest, Wisconsin, Illinois, is going up against a big Texas arm, and they're having great takes, great decision-making, they're battling with 2 strikes, that almost amplified how good that guy is. At least from my standpoint, like, hey, this guy's got a chance. He should not be doing. Jackson Merrill should not be doing this. He shouldn't. Jackson Merrill at this point is in the big leagues, does not have the reps that a ton of South Florida kids have already had against 90-plus arms.
Right.
He's
he
still
might be
playing
1,000 at bats behind. He might be 1,000 at bats behind. And every at bat you're behind, you didn't see that number of pitches. I think I'm hearing you talk, and I'm finding myself thinking about going to East Coast Pro for years, going to the area code games for years. And how do I approach that event as a scout, Northern versus Southern player, to carry on with what you're talking about here? Tell me about, if that's a 7-day event, tell me what the player does in the last 3 or 4 days, 2 or 3 days. Tell me how that player makes the adjustment, and then let's talk about the player. Same concept. You want to see how that player adjusts and how that player matures when he's facing the player from Florida or the player from Texas or California.
I think that's why that draft summer is so important. You can see guys. I saw a lot at PDP USA. You're throwing kids from the Midwest who have not seen these mega arms. But then as the summer goes on, you watch that uptick, that progression. Yep. I'm sure those certain kids would have done great on the S2 after swinging and missing a ton early on. Even for our future games where we're bringing in guys, usually we change it up a little bit, but we kind of keep them regionally. And it's not only for the fact of this is how they're getting recruited, but also these guys are kind of on the same stage. New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, New England, Ohio, Illinois. Those guys are all should be playing against each other because that's kind of where they're at that time. That doesn't mean their ceiling's not super high like at Texas, California, Georgia, Florida. It just means that, hey, those guys have just had way more reps. They're just at a different slot on their progression trail. But the S2, it was very fascinating talking to Paul.
Super. You just brought up a good point that we need to talk about this again going into the future. Let's talk about the trend line. So often I pull up information from these different data companies, and they have great information. What's the trend line look like? Averages are only averages, but that's all they are. Tell me about what this player, where he started and where is he going? Has he flatlined? Is he going backwards? Is he going up? I think better decisions can be made if we have a better grasp of what that trend line is for the player, so that you're not taking him on the way down. When we're talking about making selections, and this can go for a college coach in this environment when the speed of recruiting is really, really fast, and for a major league team that's picking players in the draft, understand what the trend line is for the player so you don't run into a trap and take the cheese.
I think we, in the scouting community, kind of the trigger areas, so right age. Oh, this guy's young. This guy's old. Well, you and I have talked about how is he physiologically old? Is he physiologically young? What is his development aspect of how young is he in reps? How much has he had against those high level guys? Is he there? I think that's super important. Like age wise, who is he going against? And Paul kind of brought that up on the cognitive. You're going to have some growth throughout. I think years probably expand as you go on versus if you're like a 1-year-old, if you're at 11 months versus 5 months, that's a huge gap. So I think from that aspect for a college coach, you want to find out where is this guy on that path. Where was
you bring up Jackson Merrill, which I think is a great example. Tell me about Colson Montgomery. I mean, he was an elite basketball player from a small town in a northern state, Indiana. How many at-bats was he behind? And not just at-bats, the quality of the at-bat, the level of competition that he went out into pro ball and just got better and better and better. He was selected high because he was a great athlete and he did have some physical talents. But when you're comparing him in a draft class with other players, that player was probably thousands of at-bats behind. And since then, he has just taken off. Multi-sport athlete in the North. So,
and this doesn't mean the guys who are down south, a Jackson Holiday who had
right.
at-bats through the roof, a Riley Green who had tons of at-bats and continue to excel, like Bobby Witt Jr. Those guys, they had the advantage and they took advantage of the advantage.
That's right. That's right. And you'll still always see, to your point there, you're always going to see players coming out of the Carolinas and the Southeast and Florida. That Sun Belt's always going to be the predominant incubator of talent, I guess you'd say, because they do get more reps. We understand that. To your point on understanding where players have been and what the trend lines are and what their development curve is, there are absolutely opportunities. Alec Thomas was from Chicago. Gavin Lux was from Wisconsin. Colson Montgomery was from Southern Indiana. Alex Kirilloff is from Pittsburgh. Not Reese McGuire, excuse me. I was thinking of the other second baseman, played for a long time. Neil Walker was from Pittsburgh. So yeah, there's a lot of players that come from the northern states, the cold weather states, that we can identify opportunities in. So
let me ask you this. Do you think you'll see more of it now? I mean, you got S2 Cognition. These facilities have incredible stuff. He was talking about the hack attack, all the machines. Mm-hmm. Do you think those cold weather states are going to catch up, or is it still like the live aspect of being down south and being able to play all the time?
I want to say yes. And I would take, youth sports has changed tremendously in the last decade or two. It's hyper competitive. Players are specializing at a younger age. So that player in Ohio or Indiana or Illinois that loves to play baseball, he is going to get a lot more reps because he has access to it. So maybe it will change with time. You mentioned running around. This is beside the point, but I do want to touch on this because you mentioned it an hour ago. You were talking about you seeing all the arms, seeing high school arms up in New England. Interesting, because a lot of them end up being good. Whether they go to New England, I say New England, Mid-Atlantic as well. And this kind of goes for the hitters too, but they do end up going out and being good, whether they have to go to college first or not. There's major opportunity in some of those northern states. And with whether it's hitting or pitching, and with the specialization in sports at a younger age, I want to believe that they will be better faster.
We've seen some good ones recently. Well, they're Cole Emerson, Cole Young, all these guys. Yeah. Hey, these guys can really hit from up north. What are they getting in? I know even Kirilloff and Neil Walker, they were big facility guys. Both their dads had facilities or something like that. So they were always raking. But it's going to be exciting to follow all that stuff. I'm excited to see what this S2 stuff can do. It's great to have them at the Super 60 where all these big prospects are in the house. Very exciting stuff there. DJ, we will on the next episode talk about our draft board though. Hot button topic. We will bring the mock draft into play. I'm not a big mock draft guy. The MLB draft, really, a mock draft is ridiculous because of how much accounting goes into it and how different it is. But we will talk about that on the next show. We're going to bring on David Seifer, the great Dr. Seif from D1 Baseball and Prep Baseball. He's our college guy. So we got so much stuff coming on the next episode, turning around. But this has been great. DJ, I'm really looking forward to the rest of the stuff we got going on here at the War Room.
Super. Thank you. Look forward to it.
Awesome. For Shooter Hunt, DJ Svihlik, Shooter, the War Room. This is a Draft HQ product from Prep Baseball. We'll see you next time.